Cool. Yeah, thank you everyone for joining in person and on Zoom. Today we have Jesse Dwyer, the wildlife project manager with McDowell Sonoran Conservancy, and Eamon Harity, the wildlife program manager at Sky Island Alliance, and they're going to be talking about FotoFauna, which is their wildlife camera tracking project they've been working on. Really cool pictures, really cool project. So I'll let them take it away. Cool. Thanks, guys.
Sure. Thank you, Mary, and thanks everyone for being here both in person and on Zoom. We will take a journey today talking a little bit about the work Sky Island Alliance does, which is a nonprofit based in Tucson, Arizona. We're celebrating our 35th anniversary this year, so it's pretty exciting for us down in Tucson. And we'll touch on and spend some time with Jesse on what their work is involving around right up here in Scottsdale area. And we'll end with a little bit about how folks can get involved in both projects looking at wildlife with them. I always like to start these conversations and presentations with the geographic context, or like the location of where we are, and have folks heard the term or know the term Sky Islands? There's a lot of nodding heads in the audience here, and for folks on Zoom, just imagine the Sky Islands and think about what you know. They really are. It's a really evocative term. It was coined in the 60s, I believe, by a natural historian, a science writer living in the Chiricahuas, because these mountains that erupt from the desert floor really do function a little bit like islands in the ocean. These are higher elevation habitats and conditions that are isolated from each other by lowland desert grasslands, or in some cases, desert scrub, the landscapes we know so well here. Really, they function like islands surrounded by lowland seas. And what happens as we go up in elevation? For folks here in the audience, there's a clue behind me, but anyone want to guess what happens as you go up in elevation? Temperatures change, right? Weather patterns and water change, and so you're creating all of these conditions that allow these plants and animals to exist in the Sonoran Desert, right? We're at low latitudes in southeastern Arizona, but we have aspen, we have spruce trees. We have all of these plants and animals that wouldn't otherwise occur at these latitudes because we have this elevational gradient. And when you add in the locational or the geographic context, you end up with one of the most biodiverse spots in North America. We have influences from the Sonoran Desert coming in from the west and the south, influences from the Rocky Mountains coming in from the north, the Chihuahuan Desert from the east, a little bit of the neotropics sneaking up from the south, and even the Sierra Madre Mountains, which are really kind of part of the same mountain backbone of the Rocky Mountains. So we happen to live in a place, only place in the world, where black bears and jaguars coexist. We have ocelots and pronghorn. I mentioned the aspen. We have the aspen and the charismatic saguaro cactus. So we live in a really special place. And some of our most known animals, right? Anyone recognize this creature behind me? It's nodding heads, javelina, right? Collared peccary, kind of this pig adjacent animal, not a true pig, but it certainly looks like one. We have, anyone recognize it? A lot of nodding heads, mountain lions. How about this one? More nodding heads. These are kind of farther away, but this is the white-nosed coati. Coatimundi is another term for a raccoon relative, definitely a neotropical species that reaches sort of the northern edge of its range, right here in the Phoenix area. Every year or every so often, they keep showing up farther and farther north. There's a resident or semi-resident population at the Boyce Thompson Arboretum. Super charismatic, very friendly. So I encourage you, if you haven't seen these animals, go to that arboretum and you'll probably have an encounter. And this is a photo, also a quiz. I didn't Hope you all are prepared to be engaged today. Recognize this animal? Pronghorn. Yeah, so this is the American pronghorn. They were extirpated from Arizona in the 50s and 60s from cattle and various pressures. And they were been reintroduced, relatively successful. This is not the endangered Sonoran pronghorn, which folks may have heard of. That's isolated or further west, near the Pinacate in Sonora and in the Oregon Pike, basically at the Buenos Aires area, southwestern Arizona. They also occur. And of course, the jaguar, right? There are currently 2 jaguars known in Arizona, wandering in the mountains near the borderlands. This was a photo from 2023. This jaguar's name is Oshad, which in O'odham means jaguar protector. This was a name selected by the indigenous O'odham community, and I think it is pretty appropriate. This is an animal that keeps coming up. They used to be in Arizona. They got extirpated through hunting pressures, but they're close. They're not too far away of breeding population in Sonora. As long as you give them a chance, they're going to keep showing up in Arizona. So I think it's a really special place. And how are we getting all of these photos, all this information? Have folks heard of lots of different names? Trail cameras, camera traps, wildlife cameras. Folks familiar? Lots of nodding heads. Yeah. Anyone? How do they work?
With motion detector, we use the infrared light also for night shots.
Yeah.
Because that's when a lot of the animals actually come out and do it, like especially the big cat.
Yeah, a couple of great points there. These cameras are motion activated. They are awesome because they extend our eyes in a way. And they allow us to sort of be on the landscape at the hours the animals want to be there, which is often nocturnal for some of these mammals. We were talking earlier this morning about birding, right? And how it's a very popular activity and a lot of folks go out and go birding, and a lot of data is collected through just people being involved. Mammals are a little bit trickier, right? They're not quite as visible. They're not quite as easy to see. So we really do rely on tools to extend our observational powers. Cameras are neat. Modern cameras, as they got better. I mean, back in the day, they were actually tripwires, physical tripwires with film. And it was an incredibly arduous process to get photos of animals. And then you had to develop the film. And if you had a stick falling on your tripwire, all of that effort was placed, and you got a still photo of a stick. Now we're spoiled. These cameras are incredibly powerful. They also work on a heat. So I think in the next image, this kind of image demonstrates that they work on the concept of warm-blooded animals having a little bit of a heat signature that's different from their environment. So these need to be warm animals moving in front of the camera. Jesse, does that work to prevent empty images?
No. So because it's heat and motion, oh hi everybody, because it's heat and motion, really you're seeing this change in the background as an animal walks by, a change in temperature. So in Arizona, we have a lot of sun and we have a lot of grass. And so when the sun hits the grass and warms it up and then the grass moves, the camera will register that. So we have kind of a unique challenge here in the desert, that places that like are more tropical, that have like a canopy that shades the area where an animal going by would be really obvious, doesn't have that kind of a challenge. But also, you know, because it is that kind of warm-blooded thing, there's only particular things that cameras work really well to capture. So we have to be cognizant of what kind of animals and how the setup goes in order to get to answer the question that we have. It doesn't just it's not one size fits all.
Yeah. And so why do we like cameras? We alluded to one of these earlier, and that it gives us these eyes on the landscape. But what are some other reasons we might want to use wildlife cameras as opposed to other technologies? Why are cameras a useful tool? Any brave people want to answer? Yes, yeah, that's a really good point. And that's kind of, I guess it's evident here. This is a white-tailed deer. It's not often you see them standing upright, but it's clearly been alerted by something, and it's trying to see out of this little drainage. But you get to, the cameras, just like we mentioned, they're not disturbing the animals too much, so you actually get to capture some of their unique behaviors. So in this case, an adult bobcat with a juvenile moving naturally and comfortably past the camera. If we were out there trying to physically be present and watch these animals, we wouldn't see these kinds of behaviors. So not only would we not get the same amount of information, but you also wouldn't have, you would have more of an impact on the animal. And the next one is a quick video. So I think we need to hit the space bar. Also by the Phoenix Zoo, another wonderful collaborator. Folks recognize this animal? Close. It's definitely a spotted cat. It's yeah. So how many species of cats do we have in Arizona? 4. 4. Yeah, awesome, right? That's pretty cool. We have bobcats, showed earlier, mountain lions, shown earlier, jaguar, big spotted cat, and the ocelot. Ocelots are actually the least known animal. There's not a ton of historic evidence of them in Arizona. They were certainly present to some level, but this was an animal detected by the Phoenix Zoo in the Atascosa Mountains, which are west of Nogales, sort of. First time in at least 50 years that this animal has been seen in the mountain. But what this gets to is that cameras can be on the landscape so much longer than we could ever dream to be. They're out there often, these cameras will last for 90 days, 120 days, sometimes even a year on a single set of batteries. And they give us the power to just be there. So we probably wouldn't be able to see these rare species and understand where and when they're occurring in Arizona without the tools that allow it. In fact, this cat is a really remarkable cat. It has traveled from the Atascosa Mountains to the Whetstones to the Patagonias to the Santa Ritas. So it has traveled in a year and a half across 4 mountain ranges in southeastern Arizona, never been seen by a person that we know about. But because there's these dispersed networks of cameras, we've seen this cat move hundreds of miles, otherwise undetected. There's really benefit to that. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, wildlife cameras are just simply fun. They're fun for us. We get to learn so much about the animals. But we also just end up with these really fun photos. Flying rock squirrel here, a swimming bear. This is in the Las Ciénegas, just kind of east of Tucson. And then, of course, our favorite collared peccary. But Jesse, are there any other reasons or thoughts you have on why we might like or use wildlife camera?
Yeah, I think the biggest one for me is getting their natural behavior. And this goes for any animal you're studying, even if it's not your main way of studying the animal, it can add a lot of context. I'll get into that with some of my projects later, of the behavior of the animal if you're not there. That kind of passive monitoring of being able to go out, set a bunch of equipment up and leave, and like Anna was saying, just collect a ton of data. So it's incredibly valuable to listen a lot about these animals we would not know.
How about in the audience? Any other thoughts or ideas about cameras, what we might use them, or why we might like them?
Has anyone seen an animal on their Ring camera or house camera?
Animal robot cameras. So we had a question about if they're using animal robot cameras. Are these cameras that are like meant to look like an animal and move? You know, that's a really good question. I've not heard of that. So I know they're using cameras that are mounted to some of the bigger animals like whales or herding animals or even this more solitary animals, and they get interspecific kind of behaviors so they can watch from the animal's point of view, but I haven't heard of that. Wow. They kind of move with the herd. That's super cool. We'll have to look at. Have you heard of that?
No.
So this just kind of sets the context of cameras and how we might use them, and they really do range and run the gamut. Often they're used for personal interest and a lot in hunting. A lot of the development has been pushed by the hunting community as they are inherently interested in knowing when and where animals occur. And increasingly, more and more, they're used in wildlife research contexts, and there's actually innovations coming into the camera technologies just pushed by researchers. We cannot escape the AI bombardment we hear every day in the news. It is coming into cameras, and they're starting to incorporate some of that technology right into the cameras. I'm skeptical on that just for a little bit. These models are not perfect, and it just takes so much more power. And while these cameras are great, we set them and leave them. And there's a beauty in simplicity. But there's constant evolution and constant change in these cameras. So excited to see where it all goes. One of the ways Sky Island Alliance is using wildlife cameras is to understand how animals are responding to anthropomorphic or human disturbances on the border in our regions. These are massive infrastructure change projects that are changing the landscape kind of forever and permanently across most of the southwestern border. And there's not a lot of research to understand how this impacts animals. We've been using cameras throughout our region, but before I get there, just as a context, the red is where there's border wall. This is a wall that's 18 to 30 feet tall primarily. It's in that bollard style, so they're posts spaced every 4 inches. And there's a lot of it. Blue is a vehicle barrier structure, which is from about the early 2000s, 2006 to 2009, thereabouts. It was mostly installed. A mixed structure. It's kind of on the lower right-hand side of the image, designed to slow vehicles, but not really impede foot traffic. So it's not that it does slow some animals down, but it's not quite as impactful. We are losing all of these remaining places currently where there's no wall or there's no vehicle barrier to ongoing construction projects. So it's a big issue. The last remaining opening will be in the Tohono O'odham Nation, where they do not want wall, and because they're a sovereign reservation, they have some more ability to say no to these projects. But we use wildlife. We place 125 of them across about 100 miles of the border in these various places and different types of infrastructure. And they've been out there monitoring for more than 5 years. And we're understanding both changes in the population dynamics and numbers of coyotes, numbers of cottontails, numbers of skunks and gray foxes, but also how these individual animals interact with various structures. So as a baseline, we see this. This is in the Huachuca Mountains. It's an adult mountain lion female moving from Arizona into Sonora with 2 of her very large kittens. Can't really call them kittens anymore. Offspring. Mountain lions are very solitary animals. You don't really see them together except for a couple days during mating. A male and female will be kind of together as they court. Otherwise, they're solitary. So in this case, when we see 3 that all seem pretty similar, we can make the inference that it's an adult with her 2 older offspring. But they're moving relatively freely. This is the barbed wire fence that marks the border, and just off screen is the vehicle barrier. So they've gone under that structure and under the barbed wire down in Mexico. And if we compare that to what happens with a border wall, again, multiple individuals, it's a different story. The animals are blocked. This is, again, almost positive. This is an adult female, and this is a juvenile because of the slight banding on the inside leg. But again, these animals are approaching the wall, but because there's only 4-inch gaps, they're not getting through. So our cameras have shown us that all large animals from the size of about a coyote and up are blocked entirely by the border wall. Bears, deer, mule deer, whitetail, pronghorn, even turkeys, yes, they can fly 30 feet. It's a pretty big ask of them, are blocked by this barrier. mountain lions, by extension jaguars. We have not seen a jaguar interacting with the barrier, but we can, if a mountain lion stopped, safe assumption that jaguars are also stopped. So this is a big chain. There are some options, and they're called small wildlife passages. Can anyone see the passage in this photo? Yeah, right. I mean, the passage is right here, and for those of the folks online, it's right in the center by the bear's feet. This is what Border Patrol, Department of Homeland Security allows for wildlife. This is the mitigation tool for a lot. So obviously, too small for a bear. We're very surprised though what can use them. Pretty special. This is a female mountain lion. I've used mountain lions as a theme through these different types of barriers, but she's moving north from Sonora in this case into the San Bernardino National Wildlife Refuge, and she's moving with her 3 offspring. This gives some optimism. It means that there's some hope for some of these larger species. However, it's also a little bit stressful. Physically, she's pretty much at the limit. And in fact, we watched this family grow up for a year very consistently on the cameras. There were 2 female offspring and 1 male offspring. As the male's the first to get kicked out by the mom. And as the male was on its own, it could no longer get through the opening. It was too broad. So we're seeing individuals, not just species getting blocked, but actually sexes or size classes of species getting filtered out by the border wall. So in the next photo, these are quite useful. Yeah. It's a great question. Anyone want to guess? The question is, how many of these openings exist in the border? 2. Okay, so we got 2 dozen. Any other guesses? We're going to hold your answer online too. Think about how many you imagine across the hundreds of miles of border wall we have in Arizona. And I'm going to stick to Arizona because that's where I know more or less the number. And then I think a slide or 2, we're gonna answer that question. But they are really useful. Folks recognize this animal on the right? Some nods. You can be brave. You can say, speak out. It's close. It's a relative of a coyote, a little bit smaller. This is a gray fox. So we have 2 species of fox in the Sonoran Desert. Kit fox, well, in our region of the Sonoran, gray fox. This is the gray fox. Here's the coyote. You can see it's a little bit bigger, a little taller, the body is thicker. This isn't a great comparison. And then there's a almost daily pattern of, like we deal with traffic, there's these pinch points, and so the family groups go through and have javelina 5 o'clock traffic moving back and forth as they cross the border. So I show these to say that there's solutions and there's some tools that work for some species, but there's not very many of them. So currently there's roughly 40, perhaps about 43 or 4 from the Tohono O'odham Nation all the way across to the New Mexico border. There are additional openings in Texas, which is where they were kind of originally conceived. And there will be more openings installed in the border wall projects, partially because of this research, which we conducted for years and published in a paper last fall, or in fall of 2024, showing that they work for some species. And importantly, showing that humans don't use them. Thousands and thousands of days, if you multiply the number of days you have cameras by the number of cameras, it's more than 6,000 camera days watching these openings. Never once have we seen a person try to use them. Border Patrol is still fearful that they'll be used, so they're only allowing 2 per mile in the new construction projects. But it's a help, and it's a step in the right direction. It doesn't help the bears, doesn't help the deer, doesn't help the turkeys, or the jaguars, or large desert tortoises. It's a slight step in the right direction. And I just emphasize that these stretches where there's currently no wall this is actually actively ongoing construction that will be finished in a year. this has been announced and will start soon, and in New Mexico as well. So we're losing rapidly any remaining opening along the US-Mexico border. But that's what we've done with some of our cameras and some of our efforts. And connectivity and challenges with connectivity are not just at the border, right? They're kind of all over. And I'll turn it over to Jesse to talk about another series of projects. Wildlife.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm going to be talking about connectivity from a little bit of a different location perspective. I'm going to set us up in the Sonoran Desert still, but much farther north. So we are in a really biodiverse habitat, but not the Sky Island. So we don't have that kind of jump in biomes. We don't have tropical species coming in. We do still have that Sonoran Desert habitat. And to put us in perspective one more time, this is the map of that Amy showed you earlier of the Sky Island Alliance and the Sky Island region. The McDowell Sonoran Preserve, where we're going to be talking about today, is up where we are, basically, up in Phoenix and North Scottsdale. It's 30,000 acres of protected open space. And it connects to the Tonto National Forest and the McDowell Mountain Regional Park and several indigenous lands. It's a whole about 3 million acres of connected open space. So in this image on the left here, the green area is the preserve. And if we zoom in, you will see the preserve up close. So again, it's here in green, 30,000 acres of land. You'll notice there's some dots around the preserve. This is an urban preserve. So it's at the urban wildlife interface. So even though the land itself was protected, there's all kinds of pressures going on around and in the preserve. So we don't allow things like camping, but we do still allow recreation, right? So this preserve, you can see it has a north section and a south section, and there's a dark line that splits them in half. And that dark line is a major road. It's called the Rio Verde Drive Road. And as people move in and population gets higher, more cars, more traffic, higher speeds, all that kind of fun stuff is happening at that road. And then you'll also notice connecting that north part to the south part is a very small sliver of green, connecting those two pieces. And that's what we call the gooseneck. And the gooseneck is probably the area of the preserve that has the highest pressures, highest human pressures, and also is the connecting land from the south, which is connected to the regional park, and all the way to the north, which is connected to Tonto. So when we're thinking about wildlife that is going to be here on the preserve, such as our mountain lions, our mule deers, who need really large home ranges, we're looking at this pinch point and going, oh no, there's some barriers, potential barriers here. We want to understand how wildlife is interacting with those and how they're moving around the preserve. So we do several things with wildlife cameras to understand this. First thing we do is just put cameras everywhere. There's a system to it, right? So we want to cover from the north to the south, the east to the west, get a really good distribution of what's going on in the preserve. We use the same protocols as the team, which is like a tropical worldwide foundation that does this. And basically the idea is to understand what about each habitat is particularly attractive to wildlife, or what are they avoiding? And so you can look at things like distance to urbanization, distance to the road. You can look at amount of plant greenery, right? Distance to water, all the kind of things that might make a habitat, positive or negative for the species. And then you can also look at how they're moving. So are we seeing the same species in the south and the north? Are we seeing any species avoid that gooseneck area, right? And so these cameras will go on spring and fall. They'll be out, all 60 of them at a time, and then they'll come back and we'll look at the photos and get a really good idea of what's going on with these animals. And we do it long term. So we're trying to get a pattern, not necessarily just what's happening in 1 year, but a pattern. And one of the really big benefits of this is looking at our elusive species, our rare species. So like we were talking about before with the ocelot, that's a species we never would have seen in person, right? We also have those too up in Scottsdale. So we have our very top left corner, that's our ringtail. It's a state mammal and very nocturnal, very difficult to see. Also like a tree climbing as well. So can be difficult to see on cameras as well. So we really get excited when we see those guys. Badgers, that's bottom left. Badgers, I love their facial stripings. They're very stark, very cool. But you probably won't see your badger out as you're hiking around, right? Anyone know what this one is? Bottom right. Skunk.
No.
What kind of skunk? So we have 4 skunks in Arizona. We have the striped skunk, the hooded skunk, the western spotted skunk, and the hognose skunk. And this is the hognose skunk. You can see it has a little kind of pointy hog nose, right? And we know that because it's bisected, white on top, black on bottom. There's a clear line there. They're also the largest of the 4 skunks. This was a mammal that we assumed would be in the preserve, but did not know it was for sure until we set cameras up. So this was the first time we had collected a record of that skunk. So it's adding information to what we know about the preserve, which is really cool. And then we also have our mountain lions, which are just stars of the show, as we know. And unlike jaguars, they don't have spots on them. So they're hard to track individually. So we can't answer some of those questions about like, did this individual travel over there? But we do have one that got in a fight or something and has a little notch out of its ear. We call her Nacho. And we can follow her around. So we see her at several sites and we can kind of see her patterns, which is really cool. So we take the opportunities where we can. But really, this is looking at who's here in the preserve and where are they? And how does the distribution change over time? And it's not just urbanization. It's not just human activity that is a pressure. There's also fire. We have recently had a couple fires in our preserve, right in that gooseneck area, right in the middle, from construction. And it goes right through the area that animals use to travel. And that changes things. And because we have our cameras up, we can see the before and the after as well. So, which is really wild to see active fire on your cameras. But we'll be able to track, who responds to this. Are they able to come back into the habitat safely? Are they pushed away for a while? What's the deal after these fires? And then just thinking about that compounding stress that they're dealing with. This is post-fire, so post that picture I just showed of our coyote. And I think if you go back one more time, yeah, that's September 12th and then back. And that's October. So we have a nice little coyote there, but you can see that kind of burnt tree in the back. And another thing that we do with cameras is not just looking at where they are in the preserve, but also specific areas that we think might be issues. So remember that dark line I talked about in the map, the Rio Verde Drive Road? That's a major barrier to wildlife movement, potentially, right? We don't know. So who's crossing it? How are they crossing it? Is the deer going across the road here or there? Is there culverts? Are small animals getting through? Like what's the deal here? So we really wanted to get like a full distribution of that road to understand who's crossing, who's not crossing, and where maybe a wildlife crossing could go if that was the thing we needed to do. So this is some javelina going through a culvert, which is very cool. We've also got bobcats going through that as well. And this area, it's got a golf course nearby, it's got housing, it's got the preserve itself. So there's lots of kind of stuff going on. And then just various different culverts or underpasses, vanilla overpasses. And the coolest thing we have found with this one is we have found a mountain lion that crossed from the north to the south. You can see here the time here, 2317, we got the next one, 2319. So that was the north camera and the south camera, just a couple minutes after each other. So we have a successful mountain lion crossing that we've captured on camera, which is very cool. And this kind of information will help us understand who needs that connectivity to be maintained, right? If we know that mule deer are crossing, if we know the mountain lion are crossing, if we see roadkill of a badger, right? We know that this might be a barrier to movement, or they're currently able to move that way, so we need to keep it that way, right? And maintain that connectivity. Okay, so another place that we throw cameras, I remember I was talking earlier about it might not be the main thing that you use to study an animal, but it can bolster your information. So we have a tortoise telemetry study, Sonoran desert tortoises, and we track their movements. And that's what you see on the left here. That's a tortoise that's all geared up with all the equipment. Meeting another tortoise, it's like, what is on your show? So on the very tip top is a GPS unit, and that's taking a location every 30 minutes. And then on the side there, you see a telemetry unit, the transmitter. So it emits a frequency, and then you can use that frequency to find the tortoise again. And we're just tracking the tortoises everywhere. Are they crossing the road? We have not seen any of our study tortoises cross the road, for example. Where are they going in the summer versus the winter? We've learned so much about these tortoises just by following them around. But also, we will set up cameras at spots we know they're at, maybe their burrow or other important habitat areas, and then get more information on how the population is doing. So we have interactions between tortoises and other wildlife. I think right now we have about 42 species that have been documented interacting with a tortoise burrow, which is very cool, right? So species coming in, using it as shape, things like that, right? And also fighting too. With the snake here. There's also, we get skunks a lot that will visit the tortoise burrows, but it's not a friendly visit. They're looking for eggs, right? Okay. Really healthy tortoise population. Lots of reproductive success. We can catch that on camera, which is very exciting for all the scientists. And even attempted murder. So you can even see the head on this one. It's tucked in. The tortoise is okay. Tortoise. So that's a mating territorial behavior that the males will do is they'll flip each other as they go. So one of the coolest things that we found through this effort, because we're following the tortoises around, we're seeing where they're going, where their important habitat is, we discovered their drinking surfaces, which are basically just little shallow areas of rock where water collects briefly when it rains. As you know, in the desert, water is very, very important, right? So they have areas they go immediately as it starts raining, and they know exactly where the water is going to collect, and they go there at a time. So we're called drinking surfaces. And this is one of them. There's no water in it now, but you can go to the next one. This is a tortoise in its drinking surface when there's water in it. And this guy fully head in, drinking that water. Now, tortoises are really good at water conservation, so they can recycle the water in their bladder for up to a year. So the fact that they're going and finding a place to free drink water regularly throughout the year was fascinating to us, super interesting, and something we would never have known without putting a camera up. And that's it for me.
I have a question. Are your cameras catching the tortoises frequently? They're kind of they're not necessarily a warm-blooded animal.
Yes, it's a great question. So that was one of the reasons we actually originally did not use cameras, because we were like, well, they're tortoises. They're not going to set off the camera. Why even bother? But then it was like, well, let's just throw it out and see. You know. So what happens is you will get them coming back where they're a different temperature than their burrow. But if they're coming out of their burrow, it's hard to catch them because they're the same temperature. So what we do is it's an additive data rather than like the way we study them, because if we were just relying on the cameras, we would miss all types of activity, but that we're allowed to kind of just add a couple things in.
Awesome.
Yeah. Oh, and I should say too, it's all of this, it depends on how you set it up. So the tortoises, the habitats, you're really focusing in on a habitat type versus the road or the 60 cameras where you're trying to get a broad idea of what the community is doing, right? So all of this, you'll kind of tweak how you set up the camera and what you're focusing on to get those objectives. The camera stop motion. Camera's stop motion. Motion sensor? Yes. Yes. All of them the motion sensor.
Are the kids still going on?
Oh, yes. Yeah, we do bursts of 3 photos. You get like a series of photos. We can also do videos as well, but from like a data perspective, having a lot of photos is easier to store than videos, and we have 60 cameras. So we definitely like videos though, and we do have a couple, but right now it's photos, yeah.
Cool. Anyone else have questions for Jesse? We're gonna swing back to some Sky Island Alliance cameras, but there's no rules here. So if you have questions now or a little bit later, feel free to ask them. Great question. The question is, are we using our border, we call it a border wildlife study, or using the cameras we have at the border, the data we're gathering to influence or change policy or try to change policy? The answer is yes. We have semesterly meetings, ideally with DHS, a few more right around the announcement of these construction projects, and we really pushed for more broad use of these openings, not just every half a mile, every mile, but either a systematic approach where they're every 100 meters so that animals just have them accessible, or when what we're learning is the sort of conditions that make a really successful crossing. There's been a little bit of pushback on that. Again, they're still afraid that these are going to be used for smuggling of all things. So they're limiting where they go to places where they feel they can easily watch them. So the border wall is only half, really a small portion of the border security apparatus. They have the virtual wall, it's called. These are tall 50 to 100-foot towers with cameras on them. And there's hundreds of them across the border, including many in this section where we have our cameras in the border. So these openings are usually placed where Border Patrol feels that they can either watch them from the towers or from one of their, I don't even know, they have their own trail cameras that are used for monitoring mostly people. I will say the one benefit of Border Patrol and all of their extensive network of game cameras that are focused on for people is they actually do contribute to the research around spotted cats. Border Patrol does report their observations of jaguars and ocelots sometimes to the research community. And so we actually have information we wouldn't otherwise have because Border Patrol has all of those cameras out. I wish that the reliance on virtual technology was something that would be applied to the security apparatus of the wall and not use a wall, because just 10 years ago, the official Border Patrol stance, this was on their website, it was their union president saying border walls are not useful, it's a waste of taxpayer dollars. We have the technology and the manpower to monitor the border. That's what they used to say. They don't say that anymore. So we do, there's other changes we can talk about in that. If you change the spacing of the border wall from 4 inches per post to 5.5 inches between each post, animals cross. Javelinas and coyotes can cross at 5.5 inches. Or not, it doesn't help that many species. It would make a huge difference. It'd save millions of dollars in steel costs, but they're also unwilling to consider that for now.
Yeah.
But, yeah, so they're unwilling to consider other sizes. There was a settlement in 2023 between the Sierra Club Border Community Alliance and another plaintiff and the border and DHS about illegal use of funds. And one of the settlement agreements was that they had to put in large wildlife openings that were big enough for animals like Mexican gray wolf, pronghorn, Sonoran, the endangered population of pronghorn, and bears. Naturally, they did not do that. But what does exist along the border are hundreds and hundreds of floodgates. These are gates in the wall that are present for when there's floods. They don't open them, the wall will fall down. It happens every year that they don't get out there in time and a portion of the wall is knocked down. There are hundreds of these floodgates. They're typically opened in southeastern Arizona from June to September. They've just decided we can't try to get out there every storm. So that is a brief relief for animals that these gates exist. I try to hold on to the optimism that when we're in a place societally and culturally that we can have conversations about wildlife connectivity, we have hundreds of ready-made passages. All we have to do is open these gates. So unwilling to do that now, they keep them all closed except during the monsoon season. And even during the monsoon season, they will like crack them, or they'll put barbed wire across them so that for whatever reason. So anyway, there's tools that we can start to apply in the future. But that's a good question.
With the border patrol cameras, how many actual immigrants trying to cross at those points have they ever photographed?
A really great question about how many people are actually documented crossing the border. Border Patrol does this clever and nefarious thing of reporting numbers at the sector level. The Tucson sector this year has been record lows, unheard of low numbers of crossing. But the Tucson sector spans from almost like partially to partly to Yuma, Arizona, kind of out there near Oregon Pike, to the New Mexico border. That's like more than 150 miles of border, and includes 4 or 5 major ports of entry. So they'll report at the sector level and say, we had 1 million apprehensions in the Tucson sector in December of 2024, or whatever year that was a really big year, which totally it hides the fact that mass majority of those people are crossing through ports of entry or near ports of entry and seeking asylum. Our cameras in the San Rafael Valley, which was that little piece of blue where there was no wall, where there is currently wall construction, on average, see 5 people a month. Across 60 cameras that we have in that stretch, all 60 cameras combined see 5 people a month, half of which are Border Patrol, hunters, horseback riders. So maybe 2 people a month are crossing in seek of a better life. And we're spending $300 million on that project alone and $47 billion to build wall, including in the Rio Grande River from Texas, California. So it's been this detached from reality for a really long time. And it's getting increasingly detached with this current round of construction project. But great questions on the border. Happy to take more. We're also going to pivot a little bit away from the border and talk about how cameras are labor intensive, right? It takes a lot of work. But we can learn a lot more by engaging community members to expand the reach, right? And kind of crowdsource the workload. So yeah, let's talk about how cool cameras are. What's maybe a downside of cameras? Yeah, cameras can be expensive, and that can be a limiting factor. When you get 100 of them, you need several thousands, many thousands of dollars to buy them. Get damaged, yes.
The elements.
Yeah, certainly they don't last forever. We're at 5 years for some of these cameras, and you can really tell they're starting to get brittle. We all know the sun is pretty intense here in Arizona, and so typically wins the battle against plastic. So plastic starts to degrade. Battery life and maintenance, absolutely. That's a big piece of it, right? That you can put the cameras out and leave them and wait and then go get the data, but you have to go get them, right? Jesse, how much of your time is spent placing and then gathering 60 cameras? Well, a lot of time. The other piece, and almost more time consuming than all of that combined, is turning photos and videos into data. Mm-hmm. We deal with 4.5 to 5 million photos and videos a year just on our border cameras. And we have to process those, we have to review them, and we have to turn them into something that's usable by assigning what species occurred in each photo or each video. With the videos, we have to watch the full video to say, did it cross? Did it try to cross and fail? So it's a lot of time and effort. And on the next photo, you can see in one more, forgot all about the animations. So we spend lots of time and lots of energy monitoring this little teeny narrow piece of Arizona with a very specific study of it. And it takes all of our time and resources to some extent. But those orange dots are community cameras that are part of our FotoFauna network. And these are people with backyards or access to ranch lands who maintain cameras. And look at the scope of where people are reporting data to us. From Hermosillo, you're getting a few cameras down there, and maybe you can all help. Very little, but we're starting to get a few up in Phoenix, right? So by engaging community, we can take our scope of just 100 miles or so of the border and monitor an area the size of South Carolina if we do the footprint of this camera network. So it's a really impressive way to engage communities, and it's also pretty fun. For us, it functions a little bit like wildlife bingo. Once a month, you ask the question to your camera, what species did you see? And you send to us a list of those species. So in the next slide, in this imaginary case, the camera detected a bobcat, roadrunner, mule deer, striped skunk, and coyote. Pretty good list. And then you would go online and just click submit your list from your camera. We compile that data and learn about wildlife patterns across a much bigger scale. Just as an example of what we're learning, this is not groundbreaking information, black bears. We have them in Arizona, and we're in a pretty warm place. Do folks think they hibernate in Arizona? Potentially, yeah. It's actually pretty evident in these cameras. These vertical bars represent the proportion of FotoFauna people that send in a checklist for the black bear. There's really strong pattern, right? That black bears are pretty abundant in the summer, and then they disappear. And then they disappear, and if it extended out, they would keep disappearing. But what you'll notice is we're seeing them into November and December most years. So and then they disappear in January, February, and come back in March. At more northern latitudes, it's a much longer hibernation. In southeastern Arizona, because of the temperatures, they are still hibernating, but it's a very short amount of time, 2 months. And so that's the kind of information we can gather from these broad networks.
Yep. In one place or another.
Yeah, that's a great question. So are we seeing shifts in hibernation behavior from location to location? And there is some patterns where as you go north in latitude, kind of beyond our region up into Flagstaff and elsewhere, the hibernation periods do extend to longer in the winter, whereas down in the kind of southeastern Arizona, it reaches its most short period. I haven't explored well enough to say like if the Huachuca Mountains are different from the Catalina Mountains, for example. And there will be differences from year to year, where depending on either how many resources that animal could take with it into hibernation, it might wake up and spend some time gathering food, or sometimes in really warm, like December months, particularly the adult males will come out and wander around, have some snacks, and then go back down. So there are patterns to it.
Yeah, you see in patterns, say, like in the Huachuca Mountains. I'm thinking in the London, like
Yeah.
being, London, like this.
Yeah, I think this is an area that is ripe for more research and would be a place to use both cameras and collars or keep like location tracking, like Jesse's doing with the desert tortoises, to fine tune that understanding of the timing of hibernation. That's a really great question. So other things we're learning is we often focus on the rare or the charismatic or the exciting species, and yet you often have, like I explained how cool it is that we knew that ocelot moved between 4 mountain ranges. There's 4 points, right? We know like almost nothing else about it. We get excited, we want to write things about it. But there's not a lot of data to actually use. Whereas when we have common species like cottontails, where they occur all the time, or javelinas, you actually have lots and lots of data to look at. And so this is just a little subtle pattern. 2020 was a hard year on the drought. And I know there's some issues with the start of the study, but in 2020, we were only seeing the cottontails in about half of the checklists. And that was likely driven by the large die-off in that drought. And then we're seeing them increase again. And this figure ends in 2024. There's actually a subtle dip because 2023 was a really hard year on reproductive processes and success for cottontails. So these common species actually do allow us to look at trends through time. And by having people reporting from all over the region, we can actually look at those patterns differently.
Somebody in the chat said, when data from Sedona is helpful, is that too far from the so which we're able to.
Great question. Question is Sedona too far north to participate in FotoFauna? Absolutely not. We'd be really happy to have people contributing. We focus on the Sky Islands, but it's all sort of part of the zone of influence. We're getting some folks from Xolo, some folks from Mexico, so we welcome other participants from the regions in Arizona. Next slide, just another fun side of it is you kind of see that urban wildlife interaction. This is in Bisbee. Have folks been to Bisbee, Arizona? Quirky little mountain town, but this is in like town Bisbee. And some species aren't as surprising. A mule deer coming down the steps, or a white-tailed deer coming down the steps. A skunk. Anyone want to guess the skunk species? I know it's super small and far away, but this is not the hognose skunk. This is the striped skunk, most widespread skunk in our region. And then a mountain lion is moving through town. So cameras are a really fun way to learn.
Hello, Brian. Hi, Pete.
Not just at the regional level and at kind of the species question level, but also just like how animals are moving in your backyard. Sorry. And it's really easy to participate. It's a matter of just getting a camera, selecting a camera. We have some resources and we'll be happy to answer questions about how or which cameras to choose. And then it's just placing the camera. There's a process of learning wildlife identification, but that's also a really fun opportunity to learn not just who's around, but how to tell them apart species-wise. And then once a month, you tell us what you saw. And it's all going to this ongoing and growing record of information. We have over 5,500 monthly checklists now from the region across this year. So it's a growing resource of information.
I just want to add another benefit of putting cameras up in your own yard or your neighborhood is a lot of times you can turn fear to curiosity. So I know several people who maybe they saw a mountain lion in the neighborhood or a coyote and were really concerned, but then put cameras up and started watching their movements and started noticing their individual patterns of behaviors and started realizing, oh, they're kind of cute, right? And so you start to form this bond with the animals that you're coexisting with. Instead of just being afraid of the unknown, right? And then you can adapt your lifestyle around that as well. I know this is kind of off topic with the bears and hot tubs guys in California. So same thing happened then. They had a bunch of bears come into their house and their pool and stuff, and they were freaked out. And they put cameras around, and they named the bears and watch the bears and just live around the bears because it's their home too. It's a really cool symbiosis.
That's an awesome example. We're wrapping up here. The next slide is just some resources I want to point out. Trailcam Pro is a website online that has everything you could want about wildlife cameras. Their tech and customer support is really great and available to answer questions. I'm not trying to dissuade you from asking me. I'm just saying that they're a really great resource. And they have all sorts of cameras. So I recommend looking there if you're interested in buying a camera. They also give, if you use Sky Island 15, you get a discount of 15% on your order, which is really nice of them. And then skyislandlines.org/photofauna, or you just type in Sky Island Photofauna. We have videos, we have webinars, we have documents that describe how to get involved, how to identify animals. And of course, on the next slide are emails with how you would reach out with any sorts of questions or interests or whatever you like. So for this point, I think we have some time, plenty of time to get a question about either how can function.
They used to just ask us needing backups. Yeah, we did. Okay, moving on.
Research or McDowell conservation research projects.
Thank you.
There's a question in the chat, not specifically about research again, when it's about more research and findings on the border wall, on the scales, any evidence that they're able to adapt to when I sort of
Great question about evidence of animals adapting to border wall changes. And in the short answer, the border wall is really new. We think about it, it is under 20 years old. Almost no wall existed in 2005. Passage of the Real ID Act of 2005, the Secure Fence Act of 2006 really changed that. So it is a pretty new thing on the landscape. So documenting the changes has been something we're just starting to do. There's evidence from gray wolves in tracking studies, not that we were directly involved with, but animals, gray wolves crossing the US-Mexico border in New Mexico, and then wall was constructed. A few years later, a different wolf came down, hit the wall, paced back and forth across several days, and then went back into the mountain of New Mexico. So an immediate change in its behavior of moving across the border was stopped. It spent some time looking for a way through and returned. So animals are having to change. And if we think about it, I have a couple slides actually to imagine some of the impacts of border wall. And a species I like to use as an example, if I can find the cursor, is the American black bear. There's a relatively healthy population of black bears in Arizona, New Mexico. They are federally endangered in Mexico. Their populations are small, threatened by hunting, threatened by habitat loss, and a cultural perspective that they're still needing to be removed from the landscape. So the northern populations of black bear in Arizona, there's both telemetry and genetic evidence that they're supported by animals coming across the border from Arizona and New Mexico and kind of augmenting that population. If we build this wall and all of it, this is happening right now, all of these stretches are either under contract or under construction. That connectivity is completely blocked for black bears. This population in Sonora will not have the influence of bears coming down and may become more vulnerable to disease, fires, and maybe potentially even extinction. I'm not minimizing the efforts of conservation in Mexico, which are changing things and improving things, and their populations are starting to recover. I'm just saying this is an unnecessary stressor on a population that's already on the brink and something that will play out through time. That's a really great question.
Well, it's getting to that. There's doing things like this. Is anybody using AI in helping?
Yeah. Sure.
Yes, we do have softwares, AI softwares that are continually developing and getting better and better over time. And what they can specifically help you out with is differentiating between a blank and an animal in a photo, which is super helpful. But also they're getting really, really good at identifying individual species as well. And so the more data, it's like a repository. So the more data that goes in, the better the model can be. But we still do manual checks on all of our photos, wanting to make sure that it's actually accurate. And we're getting a couple people looking at it, especially with those hard to ID species like, cottontail versus jackrabbit, or sometimes gray fox versus coyote, where they can kind of be unclear in some of the photos. We want to make sure there's some extra eyes on that, but it does help with processing time, certainly. And it also is a way to get community and volunteers involved, because you can house them on a certain platform and people can just go into that platform through photos versus having like pass SD cards around and things like that, right? So at the Conservancy, we use a software called Wildlife Insights, and it's a global platform. And so we put all our photos onto that. It goes through the AI model and tells us what it thinks it is, and then we have people manually check it to double check and make sure.
Is that a way people can volunteer with me?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's also there's several other sites too, like Zooniverse is another super fun one. It's really like nice and interactive. So we also use it as an education tool for anyone like in a junior high program maybe that uses Zooniverse, where giving kids practice on how to identify animals and go through that step. So cameras are a really, really great tool as well, beyond the science.
Thanks, Jesse. Sky Alliance also uses a platform called Wildlife Insights to process, and it does a pretty good job. But it is still, I mean, you couldn't tell stripes going from a hooded skunk is really a difficult distinction, and so we still do need folks to go through and verify identifications. The model still thinks a lot of collared peccary heavily in our wild boar, for example. It will never hit the mule deer versus white-tailed deer, correct? So people are still needed, and we have many of our cameras up there so folks can log in from wherever they are and help us process those data. So yes, AI is a growing tool in our world, and it is. So. Other questions? Awesome. Well, we still have time. We're happy to take questions if you have specifics on cameras or anything about the work we're doing. But I appreciate you all being here, especially for those in person and also online. Really grateful that everyone was here to spend the morning with us. Thank you.
Thanks.